Indeed, we've begun. So quickly, and the reason just to skosh early for the first announcement. I talked yesterday, Monday, and this morning with Dr. Robbins. I think he said that week 5, where originally I thought the exam was going to be busier for him, therefore for you, than expected. So I think we're looking October 1st for the exam. October 1st. And that way I'll have an ample amount of time to construct the cell part, whatever we're going to do. We won't get that whole cell chapter in, no way. But I would really like to do the resting membrane potential. I think that's really important, and what membranes do, because it really sort of sets the framework for everything else. But so it gives me a little extra time in order to accomplish that. And so it gives you a little more time now. You know, forearmed, warned is forearmed, something like that. Now you know when it's coming. Get ready. Okay, all good. So and I remind you again, you won't have me to kick around Friday. You have the morning off, sleep in, have fun. Tell everybody else. Exams October 1st. Okay, spread the good word. And you're all settling in here. I can see to the collegiate lifestyle. See, we had 8 o'clockers. One time we had 7:45 starts. Oh, but I digress. All right, we're gonna get busy. This is the biochemistry. Somebody tell her. You're in charge. Tell her when it is. The exam's October 1st. Fashionably late. Not late at all, really. I'm joking. That's how when you make an entrance, it's like fashionably late. Everybody could notice me. Okay, we start now. We'll get carbohydrates and probably fats in today. Maybe I can introduce proteins, and we'll start. And that's really the goal of today is these biochemical molecules. Carbohydrates, monosaccharides and disaccharides, whether it's a single sugar or a double sugar, are considered sugars and quote-unquote simple sugars. Anything more than that, now we're starting to get into the realm of true carbohydrates, if you will, and more complex carbohydrates or more complicated sugars, maybe is the way to express it. And again, it's the consistent ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen are a 2-to-1 ratio, so it's a carbon and a water times N. And as you will see a little bit today, we'll even look at a 3-carbon, quote, sugar. You're going to find out that sugars and alcohols are very close friends. And a lot of times we call them sugar alcohols. They're there. 3 classes, monosaccharides, 1 sugar, the smallest unit, a monomer. And then we have disaccharides, 1 bond together. The distinction between them is the nature of the bond and the nature of the ingredients, so to speak. They form disaccharides. And then anything over that, more or less, it would be fair to call them polysaccharides. But indeed, the implication of polysaccharides is there's a whole bunch. They're quite large chains. And they're made up of the monomers or the monosaccharides. Thankfully, for our purpose, the only one we're considering for now is glucose. There are different courses where you get into more of it, and it gets a little bit more complicated when we get to proteins. So simple sugars, the ones that are impactful biologically are between 3 and 7. We deal with the 3, the 5, and the 6. Okay, the 3, you're going to see its implication hopefully today in fats, okay, or lipids. Depending on, I'll give you the distinction again for the term, and 5 and 6 certainly. Okay. And so these are the ones that certainly, really, you would have to know the best by far and away as we go on with this course. And they are the hexose, the 6-carbon sugars, the hex being the prefix for 6, pent, like the pentagon, the prefix for 5. Ribose and deoxyribose, which you'll get to with RNA and DNA. That will not be today. That may be part of the recorded material I sent you. We'll see. And then, or I might save it for when I come back. And then glucose, of course, is blood sugar. And really that, and as I will continue to say to you, pretty much biologically all roads lead to glucose. That's the beauty of these sugars. By and large, they can all be magically made into glucose, which we use as the principal way to derive energy. So we do the foundation of generating ATP are glucose, or what let's call it, glucose-like molecules. You do not have to know any structures. Here are the three, we call these the monosaccharides. We will find glucose everywhere. You're going to see very shortly, the pivot point is glucose. When we make a disaccharide, we add one of these three to glucose. You're going to see when we add two glucoses together, we get an interesting disaccharide. You saw the one we added glucose and fructose together. You got to roll your R's. Okay. And so we add glucose and fructose together. You have table sugar, and we have glucose and galactose. And that lactose got to give you a hint. That's when we get lactose. Those are the disaccharides. Yet, even though there's a certain degree of complexity and different properties, to be very honest, okay, now you're ending up with still a simple sugar. And again, deoxyribose and ribose, as I mentioned last time, extraordinarily important, identical biologically, with the exception of that missing that oxygen. That's the deoxy, without an oxy. Without an oxygen, right there at that particular position. No, you don't have to know the numbers of the positions. Okay. And of course, it's going on right over there now. They learn the numbers of these positions. That's cell molecular biology and biochemistry afterwards. And that's very, very complex. So disaccharides, the double sugars, and the big distinction here is what you and I absorb. And this is where you're going to hear about what makes lactose intolerant. Okay. Simple sugars, those monomers, can pass through our gastrointestinal lining with a relative degree of ease. If we do not have an ability, when we absorb something that we ingest, we break it down to its smallest workable component. When it comes to sugars, it's monosaccharides. When it comes to proteins, it's amino acids. Fats are a little bit different, and and DNA and RNA are probably a little different in and of themselves. We break those down a bit more thoroughly. So all of that taken into account is the reason these double sugars get metabolized. Down the road, next term, you're going to hear about something called brush border enzymes. The wonderful lining in your small intestine contains all these tiny cells, have an abundance of ways. It's extraordinary how rapidly things can absorb. And that very long intestine that we have, and that particularly in the small intestine, which is about 20 feet long, pretty much everything is absorbed in maybe the first 6-7 feet. It's just a tremendous amount of surface area. That comes in AP2. So the important disaccharides, as you will see, and you'll see the chemistry, sucrose, maltose, and lactose, formed again by dehydration synthesis. You saw that image before on the slides. That's why I don't have to get up and use my bad handwriting just yet. Glucose and fructose make sucrose, and we split off the water. And the reverse is true. Okay, when you have, I don't particularly put sugar in my coffee, but if you do, or in something, then when you're breaking that down inside of you, it's just reversing this process, and the glucose and fructose are absorbed. At some juncture, that fructose is typically converted to glucose because they're so close. Okay, when you have molecules like that, write something, that have the same chemical constituency, C6H12O6, that's a hexose. That's the formula for all those three. They are referred to as isomers. Iso and the mer indicates that same chemical components, that same sort of chemical formula. So remember isotopes, we had one of those, different type. That was all about the neutrons. This is more about the shape than anything else, but that's why they're so easy to convert. Not all of them are like that, and we will get to that. It's funny because my wife and I talked about that yesterday in the car. We were driving to do some shopping. Not this particular course, but something else, which we'll get to. Okay? And glucose and fructose, here it is. And you can see the way the bonds, how they're a little bit different. Here's glucose and fructose. So that's sucrose, that's table sugar. When you talk what maltose is, malt sugar, okay? Grains, the sugar or the carbohydrate component in grains, like wheat, like barley, those type of things, there's a sugar component. And indeed, in barley, that's what you ferment to make beer, okay? Or when you malt something, you're basically adding water to it. And I remember water starts to break it down, and that's part of that process that goes on. And naturally, there's yeast in the air, and that's what does the fermentation process. Okay. So that's when you hear about malt. In the old days, we used to do a thing called malted milk. We'd add a tablespoon of this malt to like a milkshake, and it gave it a little flavor boost because it had a slightly different flavor. I don't think they do them, so we had malt shops. I know. Long time ago, galaxy far, far away. I worked in one of those. Don't you laugh. My first job, a little luncheonette. Okay, mom and pop, little luncheonette. Okay, I was a soda jerk. Because you have the little things in you. For you beer aficionados, it's like a beer tap. Not that anybody here would have any, I know. So, my eldest, when he got an apartment at Duquesne, he got it on the south side. I said, why'd you go over there? You got to go all the way across, really over from one side of the river to the other. And it was at, I think it was 96 South 12th Street. He goes, Dad, it's crawling distance from my favorite pub. You think you're giving your folks problems. Nevertheless, and this is, notice the difference. See, that bond's a little more difficult, the lactose and glucose, and because that enzyme, we're not born with that enzyme active. Okay, that's why regular milk is something that babies really can't tolerate because they can't break it down. And we most of the time we get that enzyme to come and be active, but the trouble is it's fleeting sometimes. There are individuals who can have milk-based formula, and by the time they're adults, all of a sudden that enzyme, and then all of a sudden they become lactose intolerant. It's the same thing with glutens, which are a protein. If you can't break them down, then basically think of them trying, they can't get across that boundary, and it's extra stuff that attracts water. And a lot of times there's a fairly vigorous reaction. And then, I'm sure you know people who, if they get any milk inadvertently and something, all of a sudden they're, oh my God, I'm sick, I go to the bathroom. That's real lactose intolerant. I've got a couple of stepsons like that who could eat dairy easy for years. And then all of a sudden when they got to be adults, 25, 30 years old, gone. Moving on. So that's a little bit different. I have a son who's still, and sometimes there's remnants. My middle one was like that. Then now it's not a particular problem, but if he overindulges in that, in a lot of dairy stuff, then it's more of a problem. And he was always a big milk drinker. So that's the story. Now, when polysaccharides, and I always put them on the board over there last time, polymers of monosaccharides formed by dehydration synthesis. Okay, important polysaccharides, starch, glycogen, and remember, okay, the other one is cellulose, which we'll get to. So starch from plants, it's how they store carbs. We store it as glycogen. All of us do, and animals do. And again, there's very limited storage, but that's how we consume it. So we can consume animal products, depending on where, in general, animal products are going to have an element of glycogen in them, and plants are going to have an abundance of starch in them. Some less than others. And they are not very soluble, so they require enzymes to break them down. If you look at the illustration here, they're long chains. Remember that linkage? You saw that before. You don't have to know what it is. It's a 1,4 linkage, but don't matter. You see, they're what we call branched carbohydrate, and branching is something we can deal with. Okay. The oddball in this is cellulose. Cellulose, you don't have to know the chemistry, I'm just doing to show you the difference. Has chains like this, and they don't branch, they're sort of crosslinks. Okay. And that cross-linking, we do not have the capability of that. So cellulose, even though it's a polysaccharide, again, I just put polysac, non-absorbable. We can't break it down. We still use it. Okay? Two ways. Okay? Effectively, biologically, it does two interesting things. It comes in two forms. And many of you who are going to clinical fields, when you're doing patient care, you learn about this. One's called soluble and insoluble. Again, they're cell walls and other construction materials in plants. The insoluble ones, GI tract, basically create bulk, track water. So we utilize them a lot. Basically for moving your bowels, you need to have that available just to have a sufficient amount of bulk into it. They're very useful. The other ones have a very good role as well. Soluble ones basically do something called, it's a fancy word, not absorb, it's adsorption. When you adsorb, it's like here comes the soluble, and they're basically fiber. The name you know them as dietary. And as the soluble fibers, as they're passing along, they pick up things, they pick up molecules we really don't need, carry them along so we can get rid of them. Most notably, excess cholesterol. Please, this is not an exercise in telling you cholesterol is bad. We use that term inappropriately. People misunderstood, but excess cholesterol-like particles that we really do not need to have. So everything we ingest, for the most part, has a role. Even something we can't use, we use its, let's say, mechanical and limited chemical properties to be able to assist us with our digestion and our excretion. Homage to the broccoli I had last night. Cruciferous vegetables are very good like that. Broccoli, cauliflower, that type of stuff. Think of them as it's almost like internal scrub brushes. Hey, you are what you eat. I know I do a lot of food analogies and stuff like that. You start to think about that. People need to think about that more, and you start to think about it a little bit more as you get older. So those are really the players. So the carbs are not that terribly difficult. Another thing, and this is why I wrote that down, and it's not something you have to know. This is my wife and I were discussing. We were discussing, and what happens. I don't know if you're familiar with this. A lot of times there are things that are isomers that, this is informational rather than some essentially, I'm just trying to give you an idea, that cannot be easily converted to one way. All the things I'm telling you about, they have, imagine, if you didn't know it, biological molecules have handedness. We have right-sided one and left-sided ones. When you talk about glucose, okay, you often in medicine and healthcare, sometimes you hear the terms glucose and dextrose change. Ever hear the word dextrose before? Dextrose and glucose are the same thing. Imagine they are a mixture. Glucose is a mixture of two sugars that are identical isomers, except that you can't flip-flop. Glucose is made of dextrose and something called levulose. This we can utilize. This you can't. Which we use energy transformation. So think of it doesn't, that levulose stuff doesn't hurt us. It actually tastes the same as glucose does, as a sweetener. So very often it's been used as a product in artificial sweeteners because we can't metabolize it. So it's not adding quote unquote calories. So it's not a big deal. You know, dextrose and levulose comes from this. If you have a mixture, this is chemistry. If you have a mixture and you shine a particular light at it, that mixture will either move to the right or move to the left if you want to separate it. So right-sided dextrose, left-sided levulose. That's what I'm not asking you to be interested. I'm not trying to show off knowledge. Aha! Thalidomide. Anybody know the context of thalidomide vis-a-vis birth effects? I'm just asking. You're much younger than to have been affected. Listen to this. Better mousetrap, so to speak, in medicine for years has been, what can we take for morning sickness? And frankly, there's nothing that potentially can't hurt the growing baby that can be taken. So there's very little that's safe. Okay, not even talking about Tylenol and being in excess, not being safe. And my daughter, all she could take was Tylenol, and she took very little. Now, she couldn't take any other medicine. Originally from a chemical plant in Switzerland, bought by a pharmaceutical company in Germany that made something called thalidomide that was for, and it was great for noise. It was the best thing since sliced bread. From their studies, they didn't think it was going to cause any problems. If you look up, and I'm not going to show them to you, you've probably seen in one of your PowerPoints, thalidomide babies, they're born with, it's almost like stumps of arms with a handle. Horrible. Disforming. The FDA didn't approve it, so it was never utilized in this country. So that was one, because my wife and I were talking about the FDA doing good things and bad things. That was one of the good things. The difference between and why we use it today, though no one would ever give it to anybody who's pregnant, they separated them in one, the right-handed or left-handed form called birth defects. The other form is great for continuity. They use it for cancer patients and patients receiving cancer chemotherapy. They're very nauseous from the chemotherapy and things like that. So it still has practical uses. That's the important. It's very easy to make mistakes when you start talking about chemicals. So I thought I'd throw that out to you. You're not going to have to know right and left-handed forms. It's for chemistry majors. Maybe for those of you, I have some students who are taking Chem 1 now because they're health science majors. Maybe they'll throw that into the discussion. Maybe not. It's a big deal because, thalidomide happened late 50s, early 60s. So people like me who were learning about that stuff in high school and in college, it was a decade removed. Nobody cares. It's important. Bottom line, if anybody's pregnant, be very, very careful what they put in. Don't be like, oh yeah, I'm sure you could take that if you're a nurse or a healthcare provider. Make sure. Okay. Now, the difference when we get to lipids. Okay, lipids is the parent name. Okay, they are fats and oils. Difference, solid at room temperature is a fat, liquid at room temperature is an oil. In general, animal products, the fat from animal products is solid at room temperature. Okay. The fat from the fats, or the lipids rather, from plant, seed, and nut products is liquid at room temperature. Basically, the difference between an animal product, butter, from fat derived from an animal source, a cow, and a pig, some kind of oil. We use avocado oil at home, safflower oil, any of the mixed oils, or all those, vegetable oil in general. Whatever you utilize at home, and that's up to you. Okay? All of those different products they're from different sources. So that's a significant difference. And we'll see why in a second. So what makes them notable is they have lecithin and carbohydrates. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but the oxygen is lecithin and carbohydrates. Probably could have punctuated that a little bit better. And sometimes phosphates. And that's really important vis-a-vis what we're heading toward, which is construction material for membranes. Basically, we're a water-based environment. Everything is dissolved in solution, and it's compartmentalized and separated by fat envelopes, fat spheres, if you will, or fat geometric figures spatially that separate one compartment from the other. And there's limited ways of communication between them, and sometimes it's easy when we get to visualize it in the cell. So the main types, and the one we really start with, and I have the animation that we're going to play, called triglycerides. Okay. And so I'll explain the term glyceride for you. The three has to do with, it has three what we call long chain fatty acid components. And what you're going to see, phospholipids play a vital role in construction of membranes. That's when we add a phosphate group. It's very neat about that. Phosphates are negatively charged, and charged particles are compatible with water. So you're going to see a fat on one end and something with a charged particle that's water soluble on the other. That's the magic of membranes. Steroids, maybe we won't get to today. They're derived from cholesterol. Not all bad. I don't mean to bury cholesterol. I mean to praise it. Okay. To borrow from Shakespeare, understand that cholesterol is essential. It's in our membranes. Our membranes don't work properly if we don't have enough cholesterol. We can't make things or dispose of things without cholesterol. It's vital. You can't have estrogen or progesterone or testosterone or a variety of hormones without cholesterol. Years ago, before you guys were born, most, I would suspect, they went with, cholesterol-free cookies and this, we call it Snackwells. They were, what they were filled with? Sugar. It was worse for people's fats and lipids and things, pardon me. And icosanoids they're very special fats. This is where you get to the term essential. When we look at them, if we have a chance today, they're called essential fatty acids. Essential in this context means must be acquired through diet. We need them. We can't make them. We make a lot of the stuff we need from a general diet. There are certain things we have to get in our diet. Vitamins and minerals are essential. We can't make them without the building block components, which we have to get from our diet or from a supplement. Fine. Okay. Icosanoids make very interesting chemicals that you will see. The best thing about them, we ingest them from one of my favorite all-time substances if you're not allergic. It's like, thank you. Peanut butter. Thank you. Love that. Triglycerides, fats, and oils. 3 fatty acids. It's now you're going to see shape. That was a little introduction to shape with the right and left-handed forms. This is now we really start to see where shape plays a role. And glycerol, aforementioned sugar alcohol, is a 3-carbon sugar, and because it has those 3 OHs very prominently, it's alcohol. Ethanol, which we consume, we utilize all the time. You might have it in hand sanitizer, but for drinking purposes, basically there's a certain degree of ethanol, okay, which is a 2-carbon. I don't want to get into the chemistry of it, but because they are very, very similar and almost interchangeable in a lot of ways with sugars, they're called sugar alcohols. Okay, so bonded to this glycerol, which is a 3-carbon molecule, energy storage, fat, insulates and protects. It looks like this. Now they've drawn, you got to think, it's more thinking schematically than anything else. So when we look at these things, the way that they project it in this diagram is the way we do it. That's linear. Even I know it's zigzag, but effectively the overall, if you use those Tinker Toy models, probably speaking, and what you're going to see is basically they're shaped kind of like this. So when we have long chain fatty acids, and we're going to see where they vary, it affects their shape. And they look like this. They're very compact. definition of density is if I have a box and I pack it filled with stuff, if I have things that are organized like that, I can fit a whole ton of them in a box. In the old days, when you moved in and out of college, we had boxes for books and records. All the music was on bound vinyl discs. Did you ever hear of them? See, you do know that stuff. You can get something with a USB that'll pop right into your computer and play records, and the sound is great. For purists, we have some at home. Sometimes it's hard to get stuff that's fun to play. Density means you're packing it. The difference between a solid and a liquid is how well it's packed. If we have these, we can't fill that box organizedly and make it heavy and packed. We know that's what we could do with books and records, because basically they're very easy to work with shapes. If you have one of these and it's got pieces that are sticking out like this, okay, you have a box, you can put a handful of them in, not a bundle. And therefore they're not as dense. Things that are not as dense have room temperature are liquid oils. Things that are dense are fats. So animal fats have an abundance of these straight lines, these long chain fatty acids, between 8 to 20 carbons. So here's the molecule, better than my horrible artwork. Glycerol, carbon, 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 surrounded by the 6 hydrogens. There they are. And then, as you can see, so it's a 3 carbon, and that's what we call a sugar alcohol in this case. The glycerol indicates alcohol, even though it's a 3 carbon molecule. Okay, so we classify it that way. It's not really a true carbohydrate in that regard. And it has a lot to do with its shape. Now here you can see this abundant, you can count the carbons if you want, but somewhere between 8 and 20. And at the very end, it's got an acid. You deal with organic molecules. They have this at the end, C double bond O. The fancy names you probably learned about in chemistry somewhere did, called a carboxyl group. And that C double bond OH can lose that hydrogen fairly easily, and that's what we call organic acid. Some of them are extraordinarily acidic. Vinegar, acetic acid is like that. Okay, it looks kind of like this. It's got a carbon and another carbon with a C double bond OH. When we have acids and alcohols together, and we do this all the time in our body, we bring them together. And remember, how do we make molecules come together? We take away water. Okay. It's got a fancy name. It forms a linkage. And if you're in chem class, you have to learn, they're called esters. Acids plus alcohols. The script that we give it at the end, we end up calling it IDE. So since the alcohol is glycerol, we call them glycer. You're going to see there's 3 of them, hence the name triglyceride. They're packed very organizedly, and the beauty of what happens with them is they form fats. And the more able we are to pack them, the more likely they are to make fats. Unfortunately, what we do in food science is we take ones that are inexpensive and kind of turn them into fats. I'll get there. And they're not good for you. Again, cholesterol and other fats, we misunderstand them. There's healthy fats. Omega-3s are healthy fats. They come from certain foods. Omega-6s are not. They come from some manipulations we do with fats. So that big chunk of salmon we got at Sam's Club last night. Happy day. That's a triglyceride. So the I, three of those linkages where the hydrogen has been split off with the OH group, and voila, there we are. Very, very linear, very organized, schematically like that. And when we have the beauty of not in chemistry, not that you guys are ever going to have to write any of these for me, is you don't have to put the hydrogens in. Just those little points. If it's a little point, there's a carbon. Just go with it. Animation.
Butter, lard, margarine, and salad oil are composed of lipids called fats. To make a fat molecule, 3 fatty acids bind to a molecule of glycerol. For this reason, fat molecules are technically called triglycerides. Fat molecules do not mix with water because they have 3 long hydrocarbon tails. Cells use fats for energy storage because the tails hold more potential energy than other biological molecules.
Nonpolar covalent. That's the whole idea. When you look at this, they are non-polar and the more you have of those, and the fact, and we said, if you remember, it's OH, pH, NH, and SH. You don't see any in this. So I mean, this is just never going to mix with water. So understand that. So we refer to them. We go back and look at that. If it has the maximum number of hydrogens. So remember, high carbon has 4 bonding places. You have 1 bonded to a carbon, another one that's 2. You have hydrogens everywhere. We say it's filled with hydrogen. The term we use is saturated. So you've surely heard the term saturated fats. That's what it means. Maximum number of hydrogens are there. Okay? All carbons are linked by a single covalent bond, resulting in a molecule with a maximum number of hydrogens it can hold. These create linear molecules which compact closely together, density, animal fats, butter. It's okay. I'm a foodie. Butter tastes good. I'm really one of the sages of the food industry. For you fans of Bobby Flay, I asked him, he goes, butter tastes good. Simple as that. It does. I'm not, I have vegans, lactose intolerance scattered all over my family. Okay. I gotta cook with all sorts of stuff. So here it looks like it's all packed together. No double bonds need apply. What happens when there's sites of unsaturation? What does that mean? We have double bonds somewhere in the process. Unsaturated fat, 1 or more of the carbons are linked via double bonds. And what happens, molecularly speaking, with that is what I drew before. And back to the Tinker Toy model. If you have those little springs, it can't rotate throughout a 360 degrees. So effectively, from a packing standpoint, you have one that's like this, one that's like this, and another one that's like that. It can't pack as tightly. It doesn't mean it's not going to be solid, but the more you have of these sites of unsaturation, the less linear, the less organized, the less dense that molecule will pack. Double bonds cause a kink in the fatty acids. They cannot package together. It's all geometric. Okay. Fatty acids being liquid at room temperature, plant oils, olive oil, trans fats. This is what you have to watch out for. Trans fats are when we take a plant product, which are cheap. Animal products like butter are considerably more expensive than canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil. This is economics 101. So they resemble the structure of fats, but considered unwhole. Okay. What happens, they cause what we call trans fatty acids. Without getting into the chemistry, you'll take something like, I don't know, corn oil or canola oil, which is an oil mixture. Okay. And they'll blow hydrogen into it. And so they'll saturate. And if you read, go on the back of the label. Okay. When you're buying for a dorm room crackers, Ritz crackers or something like that, as good as they taste, those are things that are extraordinarily shelf stable. As long as they're sealed in that pack, they're not going. And they're cheap to make, but they're not very healthy for you. So they blow that in, and when you gobble them up, the fats in them, when your body begins to break it down, it causes breakdown products that have these things called free radicals. And we'll get to free radicals ad nauseum. Free radicals are the modern basis of damaging cells, damaging DNA, causing eventually cancers, causing aging, causing a variety of processes. We have mechanisms to get rid of them. The trouble is the more you ingest. So when you see made of saturated or partially saturated or saturated, unsaturated oils, whatever the way they describe it, okay, there's a problem. It's so, and we fall into the trap because they're easy. I don't want to have to go to the store 63 times every time. That's not our culture. We buy things that we can put on the shelf and have and last. And we all do it. And you know, college dorm rooms, people living in, you know, it's different like this. If you go in Europe, they shop every day. Okay? They don't do the Mega Mart thing. It's all about fresh proximity to the ground. It's not, we go out and shop for a recipe. Oh, I feel like making, you know, veal marsala or chicken marsala tonight. And you go out and get this, and you go out and get that, and you get the mushrooms. Well, they go, if they feel like making it, they go see what's in the market and say, I was going to use the mushrooms, they're a little sketchy. Oh, but the eggplant looks good. I'll make something of that. That's how it works. They have, your dorm room refrigerator is as big as their refrigerator. They're not comfortable with refrigeration. Eggs stay out because they're farm fresh. They come right, you know, different than us. Okay, so modified, when we do this, we call them trans fats. We've transitioned them to saturated, and we break them down, even though they have the same properties. When we break them down internally, they cause problems. And when bad fats slam together, bad news. For you folks, probably not a big deal just yet, but it's not meant to be a nutrition course. I'm the poster child for bad nutrition. My wife said, I want to get some muffins. And they had these, oh my God, these 6 packs of different combinations of muffins at Sam's. I'm sorry. So that's a side of unsaturation. Frankly, you need more than one to make an oil. And really, when you talk about oils that have one side of unsaturation, they're called mono, for one, unsaturated fats. Good things. That avocado oil is in that category. Olive oil is in that category. Okay? So there are oils that are healthier than others. That's why we use that. Telling about certain fish oils are like that. And you can easily get those in supplements that are there. So having one side of unsaturation, even though it, depending on where it's located, may produce a liquid, quote unquote, an oil, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for you. If anything, most will tell you a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fats like that works. If you watch cooking shows, they'll take some olive oil, they'll put a pat of butter in for flavor. The butter doesn't burn as quickly because of the mixture. I use that all the time. What happens? So back to this original diagram. Why did I draw it this way? So I have 2 linear and that. What we do in our cell membranes, we do this. We remove one of those long chain fatty acids. Take it away. We add PO4 minus. That's a phosphate. And because that's water soluble, these are fats. So they're fat soluble. Okay? They don't like each other. They're repelled. So the reality, they change their shape, as you'll see, and it looks kind of like that. That famously is called a phospholipid. So it's got polarity here. So this is water-based, and this is fat-based. Pretty clever. The head is polar, hydrophilic, it likes water. The tail is nonpolar or hydrophobic. It doesn't like water, afraid of the water. That's what cell membranes, here it is, better than I could draw it. And typically what we do with it when we want to attach something like carbohydrates or proteins to it in a cell membrane, we put carbs on it. That's what makes your my blood type A positive, maybe you're O positive, maybe you're B negative, who knows? And we can attach other things like that. We can attach various types of chemicals to that and allow it to bond to other proteins. This is kind of how things work in a membrane. Our membranes have one long chain fatty acid and one monounsaturated. Okay. So if you want to put the package together, which I want to do in a minute, finally ending. Wait. Remember, when it comes to fats, phospholipids are still fats. When you have something like this, and you put a whole bunch of them together, the polar heads are attracted. There's no bond; they're just attracted to one another. Tails are attracted to one another. And then naturally they do this. They form what we call a biol. Very, very famous phospholipid biol. It's like when you were little kids. Maybe they had to do it in kindergarten. We all lined up and we lay down on the floor on our feet. Well, one way we put our feet to our feet and our heads to our heads. Just for fun. We did that. It's a long time. 1956, dear. This Hergen hand at the time made us do that. I'll show you the kindergarten picture if you're nice. It's followed us around forever. Never look. It's changed. Different. We have wallpaper in the garden. If you're doing that kind of stuff, you're ready to go home every day. Phospholipid bilayer. Like that. And that's the foundation for living membranes. What happens is separation is the fact. This is the membrane per se. This is bonded to stuff outside the cell. This is bonded to stuff inside the cell. Or inside the organelle, in the mitochondria, in the nucleus, whatever. Take something that has a membrane. The foundation of it is a phospholipid bilayer. Voila. In an water environment, the phospholipid heads automatically line up on either side, and their hydrophobic tails are hiding from the water, greater water inside. That's what it looks like. One has a slight bend. It doesn't turn them into fat per se. Okay, it's sort of like a hybrid between a fat and oil, but it gives it a density that's different and it forms an effective boundary, if you want to think of it that way. That's what it looks like. So rather than start steroids here, we will pick those up. That'll be part of my talk. We'll get to it, and I'll frame it whenever I'm able to send it to you, sometime between now and the next time we meet. See everybody Monday.